Welcome back. We've thoroughly covered using configuration and options in the tennis booking sample application with the configuration loaded from JSON files. Along the way, I've mentioned and hinted at other configuration providers. So, I expect you'd like to find out more about those, right? That's great because in this module, we'll learn about configuration providers and how they are combined to build up configuration from several sources. We'll begin by reviewing the default configuration providers automatically added when using the default web host and the ASP.NET Core templates. We'll visualize how the final configuration is populated from the multiple configuration sources. We'll explore how to define configuration using environment variables and how to provide configuration through command line arguments when running an ASP.NET Core application. An important topic we'll discuss is how to ensure that our sensitive configuration values are adequately secured. We'll look at how we can define user secrets in development and for production, how to leverage Azure Key Vault for secure configuration storage. Whilst looking at cloud providers, we'll also learn how to load configuration from the AWS Parameter Store service. We'll learn how to control the order in which configuration is loaded by the configuration providers. We'll learn how to define a custom configuration provider, which we'll use to load configuration values using Entity Framework Core. And we'll conclude this module by learning how to debug configuration. There's lots of exciting stuff to discuss here, so let's get going. Configuration providers are used to load configuration values for an application. So far in this course, we've focused on loading configuration from JSON files. This is a very common way to define configuration for ASP.NET Core applications. However, it's not the only source which can be used to provide configuration for an application. Providers can load values from environment variables, command line arguments, and even from cloud services. There are two places where configuration applies. When the host for the application is built, it gets its initial configuration via the configuration mechanism loading configuration from environment variables. This includes configuration such as the environment that the application is currently running under. During the host builder phase, the application-specific configuration is then loaded. This is the configuration we're focusing on because it controls the functionality of our application. Each configuration provider is executed in order, which applies its values to the final configuration. Configuration key value pairs may be added or replaced by each configuration provider. Therefore, the order in which the configuration providers are called is significant. More specific configuration overrides should be loaded after more general default configuration entries. The default web host builder includes some default configuration providers for applications. Here's the code within the hosting framework which defines the configuration providers used by default to load application configuration. As we'll see a little later, we can add or remove configuration providers. For many applications, these defaults are often sufficient. Let's first make sure we understand what this code is doing. Configure app configuration is called on the iWebHost builder, and this causes the default configuration providers to be added. As an aside, configure app configuration can be called multiple times, with each call being additive to those which came before it. The JSON configuration provider is included first by calling the add_JSON_file method. This method accepts a few arguments. The first is the file name of the JSON file, in this case appsettings.json. We've used this file for most of our demos so far. The optional argument indicates whether the application will fail if the JSON file cannot be loaded. The reloadOnChange argument allows the reload behavior to be controlled. In this case, the default is that reloading is supported, and if the appsettings.json file changes, the configuration will reload to reflect any changes. As we saw in the previous module, we can use the options pattern to pick up these changes. The add_JSON_file method can be called many times to add multiple JSON files to build up the final configuration. The second call adds the environment-specific JSON file if it's present. This is added after the main JSON file, which ensures that any values in the environment-specific file override those already set by the default file. The next code block adds a configuration provider that accesses configuration from user secrets. This is only registered when the application is running in the development environment. Any user secrets will be able to override values set from either of the JSON files and even add their own new values if necessary. We'll talk more about user secrets in an upcoming clip. Next, a provider is added, which will load configuration values from environment variables. Lastly, a command line argument provider is added if any arguments have been passed to the application when it started. This is the last provider and therefore has the opportunity to override values from all of the other providers. To recap, configuration sources are added in order, starting with the JSON configuration sources, then user secrets when in development, then environment variables, and finally command line arguments. Each source may add new entries or override values for configuration entries added by prior sources. In a lot of common cases, these defaults will serve you well. As we'll see through the remainder of this module, other providers are available, and we can even define our own providers. As I've mentioned, each provider can apply a new value for an existing configuration entry. The last value provided for an entry is the value which wins. Let's visualize how this looks when the configuration is loaded using the default providers. Here's a simple app-settings.json file. By default, this JSON file is the first to be loaded into the configuration via the JSON configuration provider. It contains 3 configuration entries, 2 of which are contained within the homepage section. First, the homepage title entry is applied to the key value pairs maintained by the configuration system. Remember, the section hierarchy is collapsed using colon separators within the key. The value is set as a good title. Next, the homepage show gallery entry is added with a value of true. Finally, the max news items entry is added. This is not contained within a section, so its key has no colon separated sections. Its value is set as 10. With the app-settings.json file loaded, next the environment-specific app settings file is added if one is found. Here we have an app settings file which contains the configuration for the production environment. The JSON contains an element for the home page title, so this is applied first. The value of the configuration entry with the key homepage:title is updated. The title now reflects the overridden value. There's no element in the JSON for the homepage:show gallery entry, so the existing key and value remain unchanged. Items are never removed from the collection of configuration entries, only added or updated. Max news items is specified in the JSON file. Even though its value is the same, it will be applied to the configuration entry. Finally, the JSON file includes an extra element specifying an entry for hide ads with its value specified as true. This is a new entry which is added to the collection of key value pairs. Finally, when running this application, environment variables are read from the host machine. We'll talk specifically about environment variables in an upcoming clip. As a quick primer, for cross-platform compatibility, a double underscore character is used in place of a colon to separate sections. An environment variable named homepage__show gallery exists with a value of true. This is applied to the corresponding configuration entry, but as the value is the same, nothing changes. Finally, the environment variable named hide ads is applied. Its value is false, and the value of the configuration entry is updated to reflect this. Now that all of the configuration providers have run in order, we have a final collection of configuration entries. The resulting collection combines all of the entries added by each provider. Each provider in turn had the opportunity to add new entries or provide updated values for existing entries.